Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Ridge. I am the Director of Lead Generation here at CDLLife. Been in the company for about 3 years. In that time, I've been a digital media strategist. I've been the senior onboarding strategist. So I've spent time talking to clients, optimizing their campaigns, kind of understanding what their goals are, and tailoring our products and services to best suit those goals. My current role as a Director of Lead Generation is similar, a lot more at a bird's eye view, kind of incorporating a lot of data, looking at how our products perform at scale across the board. The challenge in that being, and we'll touch on this, that products perform differently for different clients, for different goals. And really the key to get the most out of any product is to discuss with your client what they're trying to achieve, find out what works for them, and work with them. So the topic of today is your tactics for maximizing that lead gen vendor partnership. We're gonna touch on some best practices, some tips for some things you should do. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about what vendors are thinking about when they're optimizing campaigns. So if you have a lead gen partner, you kind of can get some insight, kind of what they're thinking, and perhaps propose a couple ideas about when you go back to work. Maybe re-engage your partnerships and think, okay, these are some things we haven't discussed before. Let's kind of see what doors can be open, what more we can do together. Actually, quick. Who here is a carrier and actually has lead gen vendor partners? Okay. And who here is actually a vendor? Okay, well, that's about half and half, maybe slightly more on the vendor side. Okay, for the vendors, some of this might be like kind of low-hanging fruit a little bit, but you know. First things first, like what exactly is a vendor doing? Someone might think, no one here I don't think thinks this, but someone might think, I don't get it, what's so complicated? I give you money, you give me leads, that's all there is, right? Right, it's that simple. There's a lot going on. So any vendor who's supplying you leads has a lot of ways of getting leads, right? They're buying traffic, they have different sources of their own, they've got internal tools, they're buying audiences, they're remarketing their own audience. There's a lot of ways of getting leads, right? So when they're optimizing your campaign, generally what they're thinking is, okay, I've got all these tools, right? I've maybe got a base plan out of the gate where I think kind of works, but I want to try and be responsive to what is working, what isn't working, and I'm going to adjust that mix as much as possible. So with that in mind, what ends up happening is you get a lot of different kinds of leads from a lot of different kinds of places, right? And as we kind of alluded to, and well, Bobby alluded to, in a lot of ways this is going to be kind of like a Bobby's speech part 2 here, right? Is that not all leads are created equal, right? There's a temptation to potentially think that just is like, well, there's good leads and there's bad leads. That's not exactly what's going on here, although there is some of that, right? I think it's more fair to say that leads are different in type more than they're different in quality. They do vary in quality, but the quality is somewhat dependent on how you're approaching your leads, right? But they're different in type. If you have all these different sources, leads are engaging with your content in many different ways. That driver experience with you, that driver experience with the application is different each time, right? So that's what we say when we say a lead is different in type, right? Like Bobby alluded to, there's somewhere on that pathway, right? And they're kind of different places. So with that in consideration, the vendor's thinking, well, one, how can I obviously maintain costs, right? Two, what is kind of my client expecting from me? What kind of leads do they expect? And the best way for them to kind of tailor their sources appropriately is to kind of understand how you work, right? What's your workflow? What are your expectations? They do that by understanding all of their sources and all of their tools, and they have some insight into kind of where that driver's at, right? By the time they've captured a lead and they sent it to you, that's like a moment of interest. And the goal of the vendor is to say, how can I get the most out of that moment, right? How can I prepare you? How can I prepare the driver so that that moment we've captured interest, let's make the most out of that moment, right? And that's going to take some collaboration. That's going to take a partnership. So that's going to lead into kind of a natural part 2, step 2 of that partnership. Say you're having routine calls. You're having a lot of robust discussions about their sources. You're having a lot of robust discussions about your workflow, what leads are working, what are not working, right? That kind of leads into a natural second step here. Is like, okay, well, let's start setting some goals. You're going to get into a conversation about goals, right? Because you're now starting to inform them about what's working and what's not working along the process. You're going to tell your vendor, this is what I need as a recruiter. This is what I need to successfully work this lead, right? So then you've given that feedback to the vendor, and the vendor's gonna be, okay, I need to supply you leads that work for that, right? So you're gonna start turning those needs into KPIs, right? I'm gonna touch on some goals here over time, but a lot of times people have really simple KPIs, which is like my cost per lead and my cost per hire, right? The overarching theme here is that's not enough. It doesn't really actually give you much to aim for when it's like, I need better leads, I need leads I can work, I need leads that I can do something with, right? So another benefit of that is that when you start having more robust KPIs about this process, you actually now have new metrics of comparing your vendors against each other. Now, some of these could be as simple as contact rate. Contact rate's probably a really good example because that can vary quite a lot. And also it can be really, really valuable. So say you have a vendor that has not a great cost per hire, right? But they have also have kind of a low contact rate. And you think, okay, well, this lead's not this vendor doesn't have a very good cost per hire. They're bad leads, right? And you go back and you tell them, I have bad leads, and the vendor might ask, well, why? What's wrong with them, right? Well, I can't get a hold of anybody. Well, that's valuable insight because the vendor could say, okay, well, I need to help you get a hold of these drivers. This could be getting feedback on which drivers are getting a hold of and which ones aren't. The vendor's going to go back to their sources. And they're going to say, okay, this source has a good response rate. This one doesn't. Our native applies are doing like this. Our third parties are doing it like this. And they're going to start tailoring the mix accordingly. You can only do that if you get that feedback, if you have that conversation, if you know that's a shortcoming that you need to fix. Here are just some things to go over, some really simple and some really common goals. And I'm going to kind of go into how you should probably approach them and also kind of what the vendor is thinking about. So the these are, by the way, these aren't all of them. Obviously, there's a bunch of other types of goals, but these are some really simple ones. Lead volume. So I think maybe a lot of people could probably agree to this, that even just 3 years ago, you get the lowest cost per lead, that will just push everything down and you'll get good value for your leads, right? That's less and less relevant right now. It's disappointing because as a vendor, that's actually not super difficult to optimize for, right? As a vendor, I'm thinking, well, okay, I just need a super wide audience, right? Have all my sources at my disposal. And just as the month goes on, the only feedback I need is the cost. I don't need you for that. I can just see how much they're costing to come in and I'll just adjust accordingly. Super simple, right? There is another layer to that, another goal here, which would be like the priority positions. Now this can get a little complicated and it does kind of require a lot of feedback, but likely you have a lot of different jobs. You have a lot of different types of drivers you're hiring for in different areas, and you need some drivers more than others, right? You may at the beginning of the month tell your partner, like, well, I need probably 20% of my budget to go here and 80% to go there. And well, I want this job open, but I don't want to spend any money here, right? Well, as time goes on, your lead gen vendor partner might realize, well, I understand you want most of your money to go here, but you're getting super, super, super good value on this 20% here, right? Do you want me to keep spending money on this high priority job and potentially not get you a super whole lot in return, or do you want me to adjust and just maximize value, right? Because I'm spotting opportunities for you to maximize value, right? Maybe you want them to maintain, right? But maybe at the end of the day, you want to have routine calls and say, where can I just get the most value? Where can we be the most efficient with our spend, right? On top of that, you probably want to make updates to them like, we lost a driver here, we desperately need it in this new area, let's adjust, right? As soon as possible, ideally, right? I filled this position, let me know ASAP because I don't want to spend any more money there, right? So that requires a lot of communication. It requires an element of trust where you can say to your partner, hey, if you're spotting some more efficiency to where I can actually get more value for my money in certain areas, here's kind of my tolerance to where we can adjust, right? And if you can provide that for me, I want to enable you to do that. Last one here could have been cost per hire because that's very, very popular, right? I want to reframe it a little bit more to just down funnel KPIs. What I alluded to earlier, goals that are post-apply but before they're hired, right? Essentially, the things I need to get someone hired. It's between capture of the lead and by the time they're hired. What are all the things I need between there and how can you help me, right? And that can be super, super robust. And you have to have a conversation with them. You have to provide data back, essentially. And ideally, your vendor can then make adjustments accordingly. So let's go ahead and talk about optimizing for cost per hire. It is kind of funny when you want your vendor to obviously get you the best cost per hire. No one blames you for that, right? The only problem is that the vendor doesn't hire them, right? Who's responsible for hiring? I actually would say it's probably not a bad idea to have your vendor share that responsibility to some extent. But to be able to do that, you actually have to, invite them into the process, right? You have to be able to tell them, this is what's working, this is what's not working, this is where the hangups are. Here are the things that we're doing that's super great, and here's the things we're doing that aren't really working. That was ad lib. Really the first point here. You probably want to set an expectation about when do you make the determination of cost per hire. If you ran a campaign in May, do you make that determination May 31st? The answer is hopefully no, right? Because for some people, they can hire someone in about a week or two, and that's super, super good, right? But then at that point, you're not making a determination about how good you did in May until basically mid-June. At that point, you're already looking into July, and you've barely got a grasp on how you did on May, right? Maybe you have super strict ways of making those judgments, and that's fine if you do, but you have to really, really inform your vendor on what those assessments are. Because those leads that came in the last week of the May, right? Maybe your lead gen vendor could still be doing things to help you with those leads. They could be remarketing to them, right? We could still be getting data back on how those leads are performing, and that can inform June strategy, that can inform July strategy. So setting that time frame expectation is super, super valuable, because otherwise your lead gen provider could assume, well, they might assume, because I can't really judge May until I get, all those leads that you worked in May are complete, and that's maybe July, potentially, right? So as I said, drip marketing is probably one strategy that you definitely want to communicate with your vendor about in that scenario, which is, okay, these are the leads I got in May. May's over, but what more can you do for me to help these leads? Contact rate is, again, another example I gave of, I think, one that you set kind of a specific goal in your funnel. Suddenly it starts moving everything else down. It helps everything else in the funnel. So, for example, I guess I didn't want to talk about too much about CDLLife's products, but we could. We have new ways in which we're thinking, you're struggling to get a hold of drivers. You don't really want to keep working these leads in May because you're now in June and you want to focus on June leads, right? You already tried once and you didn't get a hold of them at all. We've got a call center. You could say, oh, you guys go ahead and try and get a hold of these leads again for us, right? And then just send them our way again if you manage to get a hold of them. That's a super simple thing that we could just spin up right away, and suddenly you're still pushing things down the funnel from May. So, but you don't really know that unless you ask, unless you tell them that's a problem, unless you tell them, hey, what more can you do for me here? So now that we've given a little bit of insight and we've talked about a couple of things that you can do to open those discussions about what more we can do, let's talk about implementation. So the bread and butter of your campaign is obviously your job posts. And it's ultimately the client's responsibility to provide the vendor as much information as possible so the vendor knows what they've got to work with and they have room to optimize based on the information you've given them. You want to essentially provide them, a document which is a source of truth, all the information that they're permitted to go off of, right? You want to do that because, one, there's a lot for them to work on, and two, because you want as much clarity as possible with the audience. So you want to minimize unknowns. This is something that I understand a lot of times clients can be kind of cautious about putting all the information out there, primarily, fairly, because some of it's a discussion. Some of it's like, I don't have this hard written in stone. It kind of depends on who I'm talking to, right? And that's fair, but you want to put something out there because what will often happen is the audience will just assume the worst, right? If you don't answer a question, if there's something that you're not telling them, they're just going to assume, okay, you're hiding something, right? Why would I even bother talking to you, right? On top of that, you want to have a voice. Now, what does this mean? Well, I think probably a really simple way of putting it is they kind of almost want to feel like they're introduced to you and they kind of know who you are even before they really talk to you, right? So they want to know what your offerings are. They want to know a little about your company culture. They want to feel like potentially, even you can put on there, who they're going to talk to. They have expectations on. They know when you're holding orientation. They know how many drivers you're hiring. They want to, get a sense of what the job's going to be like, right? So giving all that information out there, both to the audience and to the vendor, means you have a lot to work with and you have lots of room to optimize. So what is the vendor going to do to optimize? Well, here's some things. They're going to look at all this information. They're going to start picking out what they think are their best selling points, right? And they're probably going to start A/B testing different variations. They're going to test different variations to different audiences. They're going to test different variations to different sources. This means you're going to have a plethora of different potential experiences out there that the driver could encounter. It's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it is that when you have different sources, it's not just a different source, it's a completely different driver experience. It's a different website, it's a different application, it's a different headline. Also think of it this way, they're next to different jobs, right? If you have a different source, right, a completely different job board, you're next to different jobs, right? You're compared against a whole different kind of ecosystem. So they're all different experiences. We're also definitely going to want to emphasize the big three here, which I think is fairly obvious, but in case anyone doesn't know, you definitely want to have information on pay, you definitely want to have information on home time, you want to have as much information as possible about the type of job that this driver could potentially be working. So your vendor is going to really lean into those. They're going to find different ways of phrasing those. They're going to experiment, find out what works. I think you also kind of don't want to be shy about getting into the weeds. You want to be able to list all these little details because you never really know what a driver's hangup is going to be, right? It could be the smallest little thing, right? I mean, I guess I always thought, when I came into the industry, I was surprised how important it was for some drivers to be able to have their pets with them. For some of them, that's super important. Like, that's a deal breaker for them, right? And maybe some people aren't aware that's a really important deal. That could be a game changer. So you never know. Put it all out there. We'll experiment with it. We'll find what works and what doesn't work. Here's a quick little A/B example. This is kind of obvious, but let's go over some of the reasons about why one is good and why one is bad. It's kind of like scrolling through the list there. Left here, we have a rider job posting. First thing you can see, it's got a ton of information, right? You've got a nice picture up top. It's emphasizing it's home daily. It's a flatbed job. You can kind of tell what you're getting into. You can't see on there, but they also even have the name of the recruiter that you're going to be contacting. So when you apply, you actually know who's calling you. On the left here, it's not really organized. It's just splashed out there. Their main call to action is a sign-on bonus. They don't really have anything else to offer other than that. Not great. It's not a real company, by the way. Pittsburgh Trucking is an invention of ours. All right, let's talk about your creatives a little bit. Has anyone heard the phrase that creative is the new targeting? In today's world, basically, everything's target marketing, right? Essentially, you only want to deliver basically your job to people who you know are already going to engage with it. You don't want to ever risk just delivering your job to any area that someone's just not going to click on it because that's waste, right? Well, another way of doing that is your creatives, because essentially the ideal situation you want here is you want someone to look at your ad, right? And I guess this really only goes for ads once you have creatives. You want them to be able to relate to it. They want to say, I could see myself in this. I could see, this is like talking to me. Does anyone feel like on Instagram or Facebook, like the ads are just perfect? Like I want everything they give me. I feel like that sometimes. Because they already know who I am and they're only delivering things to me they already know I want, right? So I have kind of here a little bit of a hierarchy of needs for your creatives. So number one here, the best thing I would say is make sure they're high quality. You have a lot of companies sometimes that don't spend a whole lot of time getting real high quality images. That can be super, super valuable because you want to look professional. You want it to be clear. After that comes the content, which I have listed kind of below. You want the content in the ad to actually be relevant. So some key details are like equipment photos. You want it to appear authentic, which is like basically just like not a fake driver. If you're gonna have a driver, have a real driver, not a model, right? You want the truck that you put in there to be like your truck, not just a generic truck. And like I said, you want to give a little bit of a culture. How much you can do in one image is hard to say, but you want something to appeal to the driver to be like, okay, I could see myself in that shirt. I could see myself in that truck. I'm cool with that. You probably want to update creatives pretty routinely. That's something you want to keep in touch with your partnerships. I would probably set the expectation of probably like 3 to 4 months, shake something up in your creative. It doesn't have to be a complete rehaul, but something. And of course, video is king. video is always going to perform better, pretty much. So if you can swing it, try and find some ways to create video content. Here's 2 quick A/B examples of a good creative and a bad creative. I think it's pretty obvious, but let's go over some of the reasons why. So this is Sky Transportation ad. Nice truck, good branding cohesion with the green and all that kind of stuff. It's a dedicated route, so you've got a quick A to B. It's very clear to the driver. They can see the company, they get a sense of the culture, they see the equipment, they know what the job's all about. It's got a lot of relevant information right in there. I already know what I'm getting into when I click that, basically, right? This, obviously bad, but generic image, low quality image. The background had to be cut out because it was very ugly. Doesn't really have any kind of brand cohesion. Doesn't really offer you any information, right?
Last but not least, the final most important piece of getting the most out of your lead gen vendor partnership all has to do with getting feedback. Client feedback is still the most valuable thing that your vendor can get from you. This comes down to something like hire data, which we all know about. This helps us establish time to hire, helps us reaffirm attribution, and really makes us able to identify what are the real hire efficient strategies. Along with that, funnel data, as we discussed earlier, getting those KPIs of those steps along the recruitment process. Where are your drivers falling off in the recruitment process? What things are recruiters doing well? What things do they need help with? Getting those little data points back to us as KPIs allows us to optimize your entire workflow. Another thought, people don't think about this very much, I don't think, is any kind of commentary that your recruiters can offer us. How are the conversations going? What things are the drivers responding to? What are the sentiments of the drivers? Every little thing helps, honestly. It can help us tailor the copy. It can help us know from what sources are we getting drivers that are more interested or less interested? How are they responding to the entire process? What about the jobs they like or not like? Maybe there's something specific about the job that's selling super well that we didn't know is super well and we can lean into it more. Maybe there's something that when they get to a recruiter, they're maybe confused about something, wasn't super communicated well in the ad. We can make adjustments there. So any of that commentary that your recruiters have about the conversations they're having with drivers, all that can be super helpful. Of course, last but not least, obviously, any kind of update to the job material, the content, make sure your creatives are being refreshed. We have the latest and updated information. We're removing information that's out of date, adding new details that your company has added to the job. All that stuff is very, very valuable, so keep us updated. So in summary of everything we've talked about today, to get the most out of your lead gen vendor partnerships, it's all about feedback. It's all about being aware of the processes of optimization that your vendors are engaging in and being a partner and helping them do that.